We are camped out in Peter, 1 Peter 3. I'm just going to move a little bit. Okay, I'm going to start by reading this passage. So we're in 1 Peter 3, and we're going from verse 8 to 18. I'll read it first. Finally, all of you, have unity in mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. Don't repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling. But on the contrary, bless. For to this you were called, that you may obtain a blessing. Whoever desires to love life and see good days, let him keep his tongue from evil. Let his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. Now who is there to harm you if you're zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you're slandered, those who revile you, your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good than it should be God's will. If it should be God's will, than for doing evil. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God. Okay. I just want to say a bit of a special hello to some friends of ours who have arrived. Hello. 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 Sorry. I haven't seen them in a while. So, this is a letter. It is to Turkey. So it's written to Asia Minor, and it is written by Peter when he is in Rome, probably like around 30 years after the time that Jesus was crucified. And the thing is about this letter, okay, it is written by a man who knows what it is to do and say the wrong thing. So Peter cut off somebody's ear in a temper. When Jesus intimated to Peter that he was going to be martyred, Peter turned around to John and went to Jesus, but what about him? It's not fair. Peter, one of the very close friends of Jesus, when Jesus needed him most, denied him and was nowhere to be found. Right, so just put that in the context of you and your husband or you and your child. Yes? The person who needs you, who you love the most. At the moment when they really, really need you, you deny them. No, I don't know him. Don't come to me. I don't know Paul. And just imagine then how he feels when he realizes what's happened. So Peter is a man who knows what it is to do the wrong thing. And off the back of understanding what it is to do the wrong thing, Peter is a man who then lives a life of grace after the death and resurrection and ascension of Jesus. And because of that grace, he is driven to endure suffering. And that is the seat of this entire letter. This letter is all about how do we live a life of grace, because we have experienced the power of the grace of God, and still know what it is then to go out and suffer and not deny that grace and that word. And that's really what this letter is all about. And at Rome, at that moment, what's happened is Romans worship pagan gods, right? And they have a certain hierarchy. There's Nero, and then there's legislation and all of that kind of stuff. And Peter and all the early church, they were not living that way. they were living God's way. They'd had these letters. They'd had the Old Testament. They'd had the oral tradition of the Bible. And they knew the grace, the sanctification of Jesus, the death and the resurrection of Jesus, the baptism of Jesus, the baptism and the comfort of the Holy Spirit. And so they were not living under Roman mechanisms and Roman culture and were not worshipping Roman gods. And because of that, can you just do this? I just don't want to say this, that might be overheard. Because of that, they were often burned alive. Okay, that is what happened. So there was a big fire in Rome in 64 AD, and what happened at the time is Nero blamed all the Christians, and then he threw a big set of persecution. And I'm just being careful because we don't want little ears to hear sensitive things. And this is what happened. So he is writing to a church from a position of persecution for the gospel. And the reason he is empowered to be able to stand in the light of persecution is because he himself has known the grace and the liberation of Jesus because he did the wrong thing several times over. Okay? Right. I should probably say before we start that suffering is relative. Because one person's suffering is not the same as another person's suffering. But one thing is for sure, we all will suffer. But my suffering isn't comparable to Jan's. I haven't walked in her shoes and she hasn't walked in mine. Yes? So suffering is relative to the individual, but we will all suffer because the Bible tells us so. And because of that, we need to know what we're standing on. Now, my dad was a joiner, right? And I know we've got some other joiners here. My dad was a joiner, and he made things out of wood. And he in his later life, restored chairs, right? And we've all got a chair. So all 3 kids have got a chair. They're in the loft, ready for when they get their own home. We've all kept a chair of my dad's. You can see ours in our living room. It's in our dining room. It's in the corner. Sometimes I sit on it, but I'm the only person who's allowed. And the thing is about my dad's chairs, they were so amazing, they never rocked. And the reason they never rocked is because his leveling capacity was very skilled. So if it did rock, that must have meant that the ground wasn't quite solid and flat. And because suffering is such a difficult thing to get your head around, some Christians choose to say God doesn't want us to suffer, he's given us an abundant life. And so they move into a theology that is not theologically solid ground. So what they do is they mold the theology around their desires of what they think God is like and what they think God is saying. But honestly, the truth is that suffering and persecution for the gospel will at some point or another come to us all. And we need to be on solid ground theologically in order to be able to stand in that moment and not say the wrong thing. And in the last 3 weeks, we know we've seen the assisted dying bill, we've seen the police crime and I can't remember what it is, crime and something bill. Anybody know? They've changed, anyway, they've amended the police and crime bill, I think, and I think that's what it's called. And so what they've done is it's now no longer, you're no longer going to be prosecuted if you abort a baby at any point up until the delivery date. That happened about 3 weeks ago in the House of Commons. So it's still illegal, but you're not going to be prosecuted. And what we see this wedge, where theologically, the land we live in is going in this direction, and God's Bible is this direction. So this is solid, yes, and the UK is going like this, and amending their principles to suit the modern day culture. So we need to have solid ground. And it's really, really important as a church that we have solid ground, because we are leaving a legacy, and we are leaving a legacy for these people, these little ones. So it's really important that we don't shy away from difficult things that we need to talk about, like suffering, like persecution, because it's it's the way we're headed. And the Bible tells us it's going to get that way. And it's going to get worse. But it's okay because Jesus is coming again. So it's all going to be okay because he's coming back. Okay. I just want to read this. John 5. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you're not of the world, I choose you out of the world, and therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecute me, they will also persecute you. And Juan Sanchez, who writes a book on 1 Peter, a really great book, he says this, today, perhaps we see painful trials as a surprise. Perhaps we've grown used to an era where it's been possible to be simultaneously comfortable and culturally acceptable to be a Christian. And I think we've lived in a bit of a period of that, where because Christians are so committed to social justice, they're so anti-poverty, they so want to serve their communities, that the church is in a period where lots of people are open. Lots of people see that as a real positive and they want to get involved. And that is a real positive, and that gives us some soft ground, right? And we see curiosity from young people who are coming to know Jesus. But the reality is that as all of these things happen, like a sister dying, like changes, we are called to give an account for what we think and what we believe, what we think is right. And that's hard because it's delicate ground. It's delicate ground. And he says at the end of this quote, when he discusses the turning tide, he says, Peter will help us to endure discomfort, hostility, with joy, understanding, and even rejoicing. Even rejoicing. Let's dig into some of this. Okay. Unity of mind. So verse 8 says, finally, all of you. He's at that point talking to the church. So this kind of passage is split up into two blocks. There's a bit where he's talking about how we should interact with one another. And then there's a bit where he's talking about how we should interact with those, with everybody and those who are on the outside, okay, and don't know Jesus. And this first bit, it's about how we should interact with one another. And he says, have a unity of mind. Be sympathetic, have brotherly love, be tender-hearted, and be humble. Have a humble mind. And it's quite incredible to me because what we know is this period in history, they didn't have a New Testament, they didn't have all the letters. They had a letter that came to them, was read to them, and then went off to visit somebody else. And that letter went off somewhere down the road to the next church. They had the Old Testament, and then they had the oral tradition. So they knew sanctification. They knew the death and the resurrection of Jesus. They knew the gospel. They knew that Jesus had said, heal the sick, preach the gospel, drive out the demons. That had been his commission. Go into all the world and preach the gospel. And when it says unity of mind, what it means is that we should be united in what we're doing and what we're thinking about the big blocks. These are the big blocks. Yes? You might have a different interpretation of the Palestine-Israel current situation, and I prayed that a few weeks ago. You might have a different political persuasion. You might have different views about other things. But the early church, what he's really saying here is, these are the big blocks. Be unified around them. Be on the same mission. Be on the same team. Stand together on the big things, the main things. There is a lot of potential for discord. I'm just going to show you a couple of pictures. I'm going to talk about Roxy in a minute. The picture on the left, right, is my sister. I don't think anyone here has probably never met her. Maybe just like a couple of people. But that's my sister on the left. And next to me is Dan, her husband, right? Now, we are Whitworths. That's our maiden name. And Whitworths are known for, not just being gobby, Whitworths are known, cheating in games, no. Whitworths are known for loyalty. We will run with you till your dying day. We are known for loyalty. We are known for hard workers. We are raised to work hard, right? We're known, my mum and dad instilled some great principles in us. We are known for family togetherness. We are known for generosity. We're both terribly, like, just give, don't we? Paul's like, whoa. What we don't do, though, is so all of those things we're aligned. We are unified. But what we are not unified on is our politics, where we spend our money, some of our views around what happened in the pandemic. Do you know what I mean? And if we stray onto that ground, woo, you can feel it go. The thing is, though, church, right? Mine and Leslie's relationship is not going to die on a hill that we don't let it get onto. And the church needs to stand together because we are the voice of God in this nation, and we really need to make sure that the church does not die on a hill God hasn't called it to stand on. Yes? So I'll tell you now this about Satan. Satan is a splitter. So if you work in social care, or if you work in adoption or in fostering and that kind of thing, right, it's a term we know a lot, because insecurity breeds a desire to want to split so that I can be secure with this person and this person, right? Satan is a splitter. He wants to split you. He wants to split you. He wants to split the church. That's his interest. Because if the church is split, it can't stand. And it has no voice. And then it becomes so busy with infighting that when the assisted dying bill comes and we want to raise a point about dying with dignity, but also dying in the name of Jesus, at the time of Jesus, yes, or whatever your persuasion might be on that, by the way, because I'm not assuming everybody thinks the same as me. When that happens, we should not be arguing about that. We shouldn't be offending each other about that. So, I just want to do this as well. Don't repay evil for evil. I think this is really interesting, this bit of this passage. Don't repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling. On the contrary, bless. So by this point, it's talking about the church, but also talking about the way you interact with society. Now, this is quite an interesting thing for me. This is our cat, Roxy, right? Roxy, she loves people, but don't stroke her too much because she does kind of bite. But she will always come and sit with us. Now, we used to live on the Bayfields. Does anyone else live on the Bayfields here? Len and Rita, they live at the bottom of the Bayfields, don't you? Right, pretty much the Bayfields is owned by cats, right? There are just cats everywhere, especially in our corner of the Bayfields. There were cats everywhere. Now, it would be night time, and we would be like lying in bed, and all you'd hear is this, row, 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 and there would be a cat fight. It'd be like 11:30 at night, and you'd be woken up by a cat fight in the street. Now, do you know what those cats are doing? They are reviling one another, throwing like cat insults at one another, yes? And nobody is sleeping, and nobody is having any peace. Because when you revile somebody, it doesn't just affect you. It affects everybody else around you. So while if there's an argument in the church, or there's an argument in your friendship group or in your family, it does not, your tit for tat, meow, 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 like that doesn't just affect you, it disrupts the entire household, and it can disrupt the entire community. And what Peter is saying here is just don't do that. Don't get drawn into reviling one another. Don't repay evil for evil. Bless. Bless. Now, the difficulty is, because we're called to be long-suffering, and we're called to be patient, and we're called to be loving, and we're called to have a humble mind, because of these things, right, when you've got that colleague who's criticizing your faith because they've got a different view, or you've got a colleague, or you've got, somebody who thinks you're being a do-gooder because you're a Christian, or you've got somebody who is looking for an argument because they are very politically correct, a very politically correct person, and by that, I mean politically correct culturally in the world, but not biblically correct. Because those two things we know are very different. So, what we need to do is we need to seek peace. We need to rise above. We need to practice walking it back. Now, if you're like me, your instinct is to defend. Your instinct is to reason. Your instinct is to explain. No, but you don't understand. Or, no, that's not right. If you're like me, your instinct is to get in there. Now, maybe you're not like me and you're all beautifully peaceful, but that can't be the case, because Peter's telling us this, and he only tells us things we need to know. So therefore, we must need to know it. So, in that moment, when you're in those situations, turn away from it, seek peace, walk it back, be quick to apologize. Practice a better way. Practice a better way. Practice smiling, maybe counting to 5 before responding. Practice moving the argument on to a different topic. Practice holding your emotion in and your defensiveness in, and practice saying, thank you, God, that I'm forgiven, and help me have a humble mind. Practice that. Proverbs 15 says, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. And Hebrews 12 says, strive for peace with everyone and for holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. So as you're striving for peace, that other person may just be seeing God. And so we've got Peter speaking out of his first-hand experience, because he knows that when he cut off that person's ear, he wasn't witnessing to him and showing him the love of Jesus, was he? Do you know what I mean? In cutting off that person's ear and arguing about who's going to be the biggest and the best in the kingdom of heaven, right? In those moments, what is he showing? He's not showing the love and grace of God. He's not showing the most important things about Jesus. It's me. It's me and what I want to say, what I want to do, my emotion and my anger that he's focusing on. So when he's saying these things, it's because he's learned these lessons. I just want to read verse 12. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous. His ears are open to their prayer. The face of those is against those who do evil. This is the heart of the promise. When somebody treats you with kindness, God sees it. When somebody's unjust to you, he sees it. When you're suffering because somebody's had a big go at you about something and you're trying to say what is right with gentleness and respect, he's got it. He's got your back and your front. You don't need to respond. God is not unjust and he's not silent, and no offense goes unseen by him. No offense. The ones we commit and the ones we receive. None go unseen by him, but they are all covered by this. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. I'm just going to read verse 13 a minute. Who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. I think this is a bit of a confusing verse, actually, because it almost suggests you're not going to suffer, right? Who is there to harm you if you're zealous? Right, that's not what it means. What it means is there is going to be harm, right? But who are these people who are harming you? That's actually what it means. It's more like that, because it says, have no fear of them nor be troubled. What it means is, who are these people harming you? Don't be frightened of them. Don't be troubled by them. Don't be troubled by the people who have a go at you. This is really difficult. We are not very good at this. So if somebody's having a go at us and there's a bit of a consternation, let's say me and Gaynor have a bit of a, we don't, but let's say we've never had one, have we? But let's say we were having a bit of a Barney about something, right? It leaves you feeling pain. However that pain manifests itself, whether that pain manifests itself in anger, whether it manifests itself in defensiveness, whether it manifests itself in tears, what you feel during that heated exchange, when we should turn the other cheek and not revile and all that kind of stuff, and when we should be full of peace, what we feel is pain from that. And then what we do is, because we feel pain, we don't like to go there. And then we end up not standing and not saying anything, when actually we need to say things, but in the right way. We need to stand, but in the right way. We need to learn how to do it in the right way. So because it's painful, we don't like to go there. And I'm just going to give you a bit of an example, a personal story. There was a group of my... I'm actually just going to turn the mic off, Gary, a minute. There was a group of my friends. Is it off now? Can you just mute it? There's a group of my... knows what you need. He knows who you need in your life. He knows what strength you need. He knows what encouragement you need. He knows what Bible verses you need to read. He knows what you need to get through every day. And he knows the people who you need in your corner. So what I'm saying is, there will be a cost, and some of those costs will hit you by surprise, and some of those costs will not hit you by surprise. But we can't, well, you cannot stand, but what we'll find in a minute is this, right? If you suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Look at verse 17. It is better to suffer for doing good, if it should be God's will, than for doing evil. So I'm not going to participate in what was evil. I'm going to do good. Hard, but better. What does Peter do? Yes? Peter makes a stand in Rome, gets martyred, travels all over the place, writes letters all over the place, goes through some terrible periods of suffering, but did it because he'd learned his lesson of grace. Yeah. We've learned our lesson of grace, and so we stand. And that's really what this is all about. And here we've got this passage that says, in your hearts honour Christ as holy, always being prepared to make a defence to anyone who asks ask you for the reason for the hope that you have. But do it with gentleness and respect. When you have a pinch point, the chances are you're going to say and do the wrong thing. If you're under pressure, if the pressure's on at work, if there's stuff going on in your family, if there's stuff that's sensitive to you and if somebody's ill, if something going on with your kids, to all the mums in the room, if something happens to your children, is that a pinch point for you? It is for me. These things are pinch points. When we're in a pinch point, we don't do that naturally. So John talked last week, didn't he? Or the week before, about being prepared. We have to be prepared. You have to be ready. You have to be on that solid ground. Paul talked about it this morning. We need to know what we're going to say, and we need to have an answer ready so that actually, because we've got that answer ready, when the heat is turned up, we don't say it in the wrong way. And you get your answers ready in places like life groups or in like little prayer triplets or when you're talking with your Christian friends and you talk through things. So, for example, yesterday when I was just putting the finishing touches on this, there was something that I was going to say, a term that I was going to say, and I did not know if this term should be used or not, or whether it might insult people, because I am not down with the young people, right? I don't know what terminology I can use and what terminology I can't use, and I didn't want to say the wrong thing. So I texted Jack and Celia and said, is it okay for me to say this? And they went, probably not. Thank you. Okay? Because it's not going to help you if I say something offensive, is it? If I accidentally say something offensive to you, is it going to help you? No. So I don't want to say anything that's going to be controversial just to make my point. I want to say things that are going to be helpful, yes, with gentleness, with respect, and keeping everybody on solid ground. That's what I want, and I don't want to be a distraction to the gospel. And the thing is, if you go meow, meow, and then you say something really disrespectful, even if you say the right thing but in a disrespectful manner, it's not going to be received. So if you say the right thing, but you say it in a way that's really offensive, really hurtful, you're not shining for Jesus in that moment. You're not going to be convincing anybody that he has done anything radical in your heart. You're going to be convincing people that you know your stuff, but you're not changed by it. And that's what Peter is saying here. So we need to practice, seek help, speak to one another, and we want it to be like muscle memory. So when we give a response, we know it so well, the muscle memory kicks in. Even if the heat is on, the pinch point is there, when we're saying something back about Jesus, we're saying it in the right way. And if we don't get it in the right way, immediately we apologize. Be quick to apologize. Be quick to fix. And don't just say it, mean it. Okay. You wouldn't go abseiling without a rope, would you? Wouldn't last long. Yeah? Don't go into a conversation with a non-Christian or with your work colleagues or with your family about some controversial topic without knowing, without being prepared, without knowing how you're going to say it. Think carefully about what you say. Things, words have power. We can probably all think about times when we've said something in a way that we didn't mean it to happen. Didn't mean it to come out that way. Okay. So, coming to the end. You know, Jesus suffered. And Jesus suffered. And on the other side of Jesus' suffering was salvation. And that is a great mirror. Because on the other side of your suffering might very well be somebody's salvation. You know that thing that we talked about last week, husbands and wives? Yeah? And Martin said, didn't he? He said, she's God's daughter before she's your wife. Woo! What a great phrase. She's God's daughter before she's your wife. And he was talking, wasn't he, about the way wives represent God in the home if the husband isn't there. And he's reading that from that passage. These people are God's children. We're getting in a dispute with our neighbours, with our colleagues, with our family members. They're God's children. It's not worth it. Do it gently. Say it carefully. Walk away and say it later. If you can't say it nicely in the moment, walk away and say it later. Jesus suffered, the righteous for the unrighteous. When we suffer, we are suffering the righteous for the unrighteous. When we are persecuted or challenged, we are suffering the righteous for the unrighteous. We are. If you suffer for standing up for God's theology on solid ground, and you're unpopular or you're rejected, remember that God supplies all of your needs. You're blessed. Don't fear threats. Don't be frightened. Get your Christian posse around you, and they will help you. They'll help you navigate it. Reach out to someone who's on the same journey as you that can pray and hold you along. Peter, who cut off someone's ear, says, be known by your gentleness and your respect for others. Peter, the one who denied Jesus and disowned him, now teaches us to have grace with one another. Peter argued with the disciples about who would be the greatest. He's teaching us to be humble. Peter challenged Jesus when he said he was going to die, and he's now teaching us that it's better to suffer for doing good than to do evil. Peter understands that the outcome of suffering is the glory of God, the presentation of a loving church that lives differently. And people will either love that or they won't, and that's not your responsibility. A church that speaks truth with courage, but with gentleness and kindness, is radically faithful to God and radically loving to every person who walks through the doors. That is the church that we want to be. That is the church we want to be.